Richard Seaman.
Hey, thanks, Larry. Reference your starting late and, and the 10-minute break. I always tell people that I hope to be late to my funeral.
Years by years.
As my 35-year bride would say, I'm late to everything. So, hey, I thought I'd start with a little story. As I was talking to a couple of people about what to talk about and what might be of interest, there seems to be an aviation interest there. So I have a really good story that is kind of near and dear to my heart. But other than that, it's just one of those gee whiz stories that people have a lot of interest in. So in the fall of 1995, a business jet was chartered by the Coca-Cola Bottling Company, and there was 2 or 4 Coca-Cola executives and 2 Albertsons, if you remember the Albertsons grocery store, Southwest Market. So there were 2 Albertsons executives, and so there were 2 empty seats, and then the 2 pilots. There was no cargo because they were going to fly from Salt Lake City to Idaho Falls, only for about 4 hours on the ground in Idaho Falls. They had a 6 a.m. departure. It was a Saturday, so that meant that everybody got up at about 4 a.m. and made their way to the airport on the east side of the field to get on the private jet, the charter jet, and then fly up. So the jet was, let me get the right screen up, it was actually 222 Mike Delta, but that is the kind of airplane it was, right there on the screen. I hope you can see that. But pretty fancy little jet. Not your high performer, but a very stable aircraft, great for the shorter, quick jaunts. That was perfect for what they were doing. So at about 7 a.m., the aircraft had departed and had come off the airport, gone southbound, made the turnaround, and had climbed up to about 22,000 feet and was making its way northward towards Idaho Falls. Everything was very, very normal with this flight. Nothing at all unusual. It was the fall, and so at 6 a.m. it was dark, but at 7 a.m. the sun had started to come out a little bit, and so now, especially at 22,000 feet, it was pretty light out. So a little background information. At this time in 1995, I was a supervisor managing the operation, managing about that time of day on a Saturday morning, not very many aircraft around, not too much going on, so we were down to a kind of a skeleton operation. Had about 6 controllers working in the area, and maybe as many as 8 controllers somewhere on break or doing something or just arriving to work. Again, not very busy, and so in the control room itself, there was a lot of side conversations going on, which was very allowable and expected almost, because there just wasn't enough there to do. There was very few airplanes talking, not much at all to do. In air traffic control, every time an aircraft transitions sectors, which to a non-aviation person, it's a little bit like counties. Every time they transition into a new county or sector, they have to check in with the controller. They change their radio frequency much like you would change your FM dial. And you actually call in and say, hey, Salt Lake, this is so-and-so. And everything is done remote from Salt Lake, so that's where we were on the ground. All of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere, my newest controller, it only been a journeyman controller, a full performance controller, for about maybe 6 months when this happened, sat right up in his chair and motioned for me in a hurry to get over to his sector. As I walked over and asked him what he needed, I could hear him talking on his radio and saying, hey, November 222 Mike Delta, this is Salt Lake Center, do you read me? He repeated that 3 times, and apparently there was no answer coming back to him at all. So he had witnessed the aircraft cross basically the Utah-Idaho border right near Malad, Idaho. But once the aircraft had checked in, everything went silent. And then the screen went silent as well, meaning that we lost our radar communications or radar contact with that airplane. So there was all of a sudden a lot of silence in the entire control room, as every other controller, the 4 or 5 or 6 of them that were in the room at the time, began to pay particular attention to this one younger controller to try to find out what was happening and if they could help. And a lot like rubbernecking on a highway, everybody has to look. So air traffic controller is a very strong, tight bond group of people. Nationwide right now, there's just under 20,000 controllers, so that's really not that many, but they're very close. 9/11 is a really good example. So 9/11 for air traffic controller purposes really just happened around New York and Boston, but controllers across the entire nation took it very personally what happened, and so I'm just kind of showing you that it really, if we have somebody that's bleeding, then everybody is going to bleed. It's just that way. So silence is sometimes the worse than chaos, and that's exactly what we had here. Was we had no picture of the airplane. We also did not have any communication. We just had no idea. So all of this is happening, and all of us are staring at the scope, this one scope, and we're all listening, and there's obvious some emotional trauma going to happen with this newer controller pretty quick, maybe even some shock. There's a lot going on, and all of a sudden I realize, wait a minute, I'm the one that's in charge of this operation. I'm not a spectator. What is it that I'm supposed to be doing? Because this was a new turf for me. I had never had an airplane go down. I just didn't have any idea what was going on. So I had to do some very quick analysis and decide what my priorities were. So the very first thing I did was I turned to the other 4 or 5 controllers in the room, and I said, you guys need to turn around and face your scopes and pay attention to your own sectors, because they had all become spectators as well and had left what their duties were and had walked away from that. Definitely a problem. And then I had to worry about the missing aircraft. So the missing aircraft, where is he? What happened to him? Is it just a technical glitch, or is there probably, which again, probably there's something wrong with the airplane? And then what about my controller? I've got to get him off of that scope. I've got to get him away from the situation, because it's just going to get worse, and he is definitely not in a capacity to work that airplane right now. So I got to call somebody back from break. But the operations, so back to the operations again. I'm still owning all of this other airspace, and all of my controllers are owning these little chunks of airspace. They've got to go back and do that. So the question becomes, which of all of those is your priority? I'd like to be able to ask you, but let's just go for the sake of time. We'll just talk about it. So what I did, again, first was I told everybody, get back on your scopes. This is definitely the priority. We've got however many more it was, some 25 total airplane, which is not very many at all, in the airspace at that time. Those people were counting on the controllers to keep them separated and safe from other airplanes and obstructions and everything else. So we had to go back and do our job. We had to refocus. Did I have to worry about the missing aircraft? Absolutely. We needed to go find him. Not something the air traffic controllers do, except for reporting the information to those that would go find him. And then my controller. I really needed to get my controller taken care of right away, so as not to cause any more trauma with him, and make sure that he was okay and that we were going to get through this together. So all of that that's kind of the build-up story. I'll give you the punchline. This is a little PG-13. I'm not getting any gruesome details, but it's definitely PG-13. So the aircraft was found approximately 2 hours later by a county sheriff there in southern Idaho. The aircraft had essentially nosed over. It had stalled completely, so one wing fell off. I didn't say that right. One wing fell over, so the aircraft is still intact, but it basically went into a complete spin and went straight down at full throttle, by the way. To give you an idea how fast the aircraft, at the impact of that, so pretty rocky terrain, pretty hard dirt. 21 foot from is how big the cabin was. So if you're looking at the picture there, basically from the engine in the rear to the front window is 21 feet. That scrunched up to a little over 3 feet in total length. So take that and just compress it like an accordion into a 3-foot space. The nose of the aircraft was buried 12 feet under the surface of the ground. So you can see it hit with tremendous impact, where the airplane in flight level at regular flight would do between 300 and 350 knots, so around 400 miles per hour. In this tailspin, at full throttle going down, it was doing about 600 miles per hour. Definitely way too fast, and really don't know what happened. So the air pilots were all engaged to keep them level at the same speed. The pilots can actually, in an airplane that's highly technical like this airplane is, they can essentially step away from the cockpit and the airplane will fly itself. They don't do that, but they could. And so in that mode, sometimes pilots don't pay super close attention to the airplane because it's paying attention to itself. The air iced up. So in Salt Lake City, it was a clear day, but when you got north to the Idaho border, not all that far, there were some higher level clouds, and this aircraft had flown into some clouds. Did not have icing on, anti-ice, anything turned on because of the clearness in Salt Lake City. So the question became, what happened to the pilots? What did they do? All of them were, of course, killed on impact. The airplane didn't really burn very much. It basically just became a lot smaller than it was. But what happened to the pilots? Either they were engrossed in a conversation with the other people in the back of the airplane, perhaps. Perhaps they had dozed off. They didn't have a very early start that day. And again, the aircraft will take care of itself. So there's really not a lot of, other than speculation, there's not a lot that we could say about what happened to the airplane. So the point of all that story is not to be PG-13 with you, but the point is, hey, you know, there is something to this whole management thing. So I know I don't have a whole lot of time, so let's run through. I want to take you through a little exercise, and it all has a point, but I want you to write down your age. You might get out your calculators, your phones, if you're not already on them. You can do this on the calculator, but if you'll start with your age and then multiply that number by 20, and then add today's date, and that date's wrong because this was last time we did this. So today would be the 7th. Multiply that entire new number by 5. Add your shoe size. Getting really complex here. Larry's pulling out his toes anyway, so he can look at the shoe size to count here. Subtract 5 times today's date, so that would be 5 times 7, or 35. Subtract that from your total number, and look closely at your answer. If you've done the math right, what should read is your age, followed by your shoe size. So,
wow.
So some people might think that that's magic. Some people might think that, most of us would say, well, that's just a math equation, which that is exactly what it is. But the point is it's not really magic if you know the trick. I've recently learned a few card tricks to wow and amaze people. And every time I learn a new trick, it kind of makes me look differently at magicians, because I had such a reverence for magicians until I learned the secrets, and no longer is it a trick. It's just learning how to do it. So in my experience, and I've been doing this whole management speak, training managers how to be supervisors, all those kind of things for several years now, more than 20 years, I've come up with 4 things that basically managers do. The first one, and the most important, is the safety and welfare of their team. So safety being, especially in like a construction or assembly line, all those things, it actually is their safety. Welfare has to do with things away from the workplace. Insurance, making sure they have the right forms filled out, making sure that they're not going bankrupt, that they're not, all of those peripheral things, but they keep them because the number 2 thing is productivity. If I'm the CEO and I'm hiring one of you to be my manager, to be a supervisor, these are the first 2 priorities I have. And I have to have safety and welfare first, because productivity goes out the window if I don't have safety. If I don't have employees to produce, then I'm not going to be producing. Most managers get hung up right here because they still see themselves as the widget producer instead of the person that is producing widget producers. Big shift in thought and theory, but some supervisors still have to produce some widgets along with being a manager, but most actually get out of it entirely and become that. So the third thing is to become an enabler. Again, this has to do with productivity, but if I assign a person to do spot B in the assembly line, then they sit down and they start producing, and they do B over and over and over again. Well, if A goes away, or the widget that they have to reach and attach to whatever it is we're producing goes away, then they cannot be productive anymore. So my role is to become their resource enabler. I am going to provide and make sure that things can run the most efficient and the most optimally at all times, so that my widget producers can focus on nothing more than widget producing. The fourth one is, again, me, the CEO, hiring a manager. I'm putting people in that place because I want them to be smart, and I will always be thinking of a bigger, better, faster, stronger mousetrap. I want a better mousetrap. And so I'm hiring a manager so that they can actually show me this is how to do it. So if you start thinking of it this way, now you're starting to see how priorities become a little easier to figure out as you're thrown into a situation like I was with that airplane. The safety and welfare of my employees versus the productivity, which is the operation, and am I giving them everything they need to be successful? Can we do this any better to make it more efficient, more safe, all of those kind of things. So an employee has to be engaged, and we're all engaged to varying degrees. This is a Covey chart. Most of you, I'm sure, have seen a chart like this. I like to add the color to it, but basically your engagement is based off of 2 axes, your attitude and your productivity, which is subjective and objective. I can measure your productivity fairly easily. Your attitude is something that is not necessarily easily measured, and it's my opinion. I'm watching you, I'm thinking. So productivity, I tell you I want 10 widgets, you make 12 widgets, thumbs up, you're a good producer. Attitude, we get in our team meeting and I say, all right, everybody, get together, we're all going to sing Kumbaya, and you sit in the back of the room, your arms are crossed, and you're shaking your head and you're rolling your eyes. Obviously, you don't have a good attitude. So that would make you a yellow employee, somebody that's cautioned because they could be very cancerous to an organization. So based on this engagement, what I tell managers, I'm just sharing just a little bit of some of the things that I talk about, but what I tell new managers is I would expect, if I was your CEO and I was hiring as a manager, I would expect you to know where your employees are at all times based on Covey's chart of engagement. Are they engaged? And so what I tell them is at least once a week, sit down with a list of your employees. So here's my employees: John Smith, Dan Jones, Mary Johnson, Betty Wilson, Susie Brown. All those people are on my team. And then my name is actually going to go in the bottom of this list. But now I'm going to ask myself, this is a very short exercise, where's John Smith? He's my #1 guy. He's always high productive. He's always got a great attitude. Love being around him. He's a blue employee. Dan Jones is brand new to my team. He doesn't really understand how to produce yet. He's learning, but he loves his new job, and he loves me, his new boss, and so he's a green employee. And so on and so forth. You're going to put these people on the graph. What this does for you is it sets you up for success in conversation, in coaching, and managing those people. So now when I run into John Smith in the hall or in the workplace and I see him, I already in my head know, oh yeah, John Smith is a blue employee, and so what I need to do with John Smith is congratulate him, pat him on the back, give him some positive feedback so he'll stay there and recognize that I appreciate who he is and what he's doing. The other thing that you always got to know where your employees are is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I know I'm running out of time, so psychologically, safety, there's food and shelter. We take care of that when we hire people. Love and belonging. So that's where they belong to a culture. Maslow says that almost everybody that we know, that we come in contact with in a society where they don't worry about food and shelter, in other words, where they're employed, they worry about whether or not they belong to the culture. Am I fitting in? Am I accepted? Do people like me? Do they invite me to the Friday night beer, or do they take me when they go golfing on Saturday? Do I get invited? All of those kind of things is what the love and belonging would be. Self-esteem is whether or not my boss and my peers think that I'm contributing. So once you feel like you're part of the culture, which is the love and belonging, you immediately start wanting to contribute back to the team and the organization's success. And then we've got on top the self-actualization, which is something that everybody does on their own. So a little clue as we look at this chart here, self-actualization is actually something that, again, it's kind of self-driven, but as a CEO hiring managers, I want people that self-actualize. I want people because that's where building a better mousetrap is always going to hang out right there. So if I match up what we just talked about, employment takes care of safety and physiological, the food and shelter. The manager takes care of the group, whether or not they belong to the culture and whether or not they're getting that self-esteem back, that they're contributing, that they are doing something good and right, and then back to the self. That's the only way that you're going to get self-actualization. Is you actually have to get there. I can't assign someone to be innovative. I can give you time to be innovative, but it's not something that I can assign. But a person can say, wow, I'm thinking that if we just did this and this, it would save 10 steps, it would save whatever that is. So is it all magic? No, it's not magic at all. Here's some tips. People don't care how much you know or how great your product is until they know how much you care. This is becoming more and more important as our workforce gets younger and younger. Our workforce today filled with X, Y's, and Z's, especially the Y's and Z's, they need to know that you care for them first. And they'll go to bat for you, they'll work hard for you, but if you don't keep giving them that feedback, I have a little saying that I made up years ago about the Y generation, really, and that was fun, friendly soccer, everyone gets a trophy. they really want a participation trophy from their manager. They want to know that they're appreciated, that they're good. So until you show them in a relationship type environment that you care about them, they really don't care how much you know or how smart you are. A person who feels appreciated will always do more than what is expected. And then here's 5 things that today's managers should always remember. Number 1, be smart with your phones. We can overuse them, but also realize that they are really a great resource. We can use them. And I tell people, when I teach time management, I tell people, if you don't have a device and you're not using it every day to control how you deal with things, including and everything else, you're just missing the mark, because all that stuff's really good for us. Be intentional in what you do. If you know where you want to be and what you want to be in 5 years, then the little decisions that you make every day become so much easier to make, because they fit into the grand scheme of who it is. And you won't make bad decisions. You won't waste time. You won't do things that will take you away from where you want to be in 5 years. So you got to be intentional. Remember that you always got to be listening, learning, and remembering. And I put listen first because I'm a real believer that the best way for you to get a good relationship with your employees is to sit on your hands, bite your tongue, and listen to them. The 7 seconds of silence rule, it says that if you ask a question and then sit for 7 seconds, your employee will start talking to you, or your child. That's really true. So you have to have that inside of you, that I am going to listen no matter what. I'm going to shut up. I'm not going to echo. I might nod my head so that they know I'm listening, but I'm not going to interrupt them. I'm going to let them speak. Perspective has 4 elements to it. There's your perspective, my perspective, the actual truth of it, and then there's the 4th perspective, and that is what everybody else on the outside is observing. So they don't actually see what's happening, but they're watching you and I observe, and so they see it. So remember that there's always more than just my perspective to things. There's actually 3 other perspectives. And then just remember that management isn't magic. Be intentional, be methodical, do things for a purpose. Think about how you're going to be a leader today. Leadership doesn't just happen. But sit down in the morning with yourself and say, you know what, I'm going to approach Larry today, and I'm just going to tell him that, you know, I see his future as being really bright in our organization. That's going to be huge to Larry, and it will stick with him for a long time. That's what leadership really is. Planting those seeds, it doesn't take a long time. It does take, especially when you're first starting out and messing with leadership a little bit, and experimenting, yeah, it does take a little thought process. But be methodical, be intentional, and it will work out really well for you. And then finally, the LSD. So a lot of people think I'm hooked on LSD. In fact, I talk about it when I do motivational speaking. It's one of my favorite talks. I tell people that I am extremely addicted to LSD. In fact, I'm so addicted, and it's got such addictive values that I take it probably at least 100 times a day. I can't stand to not be without it. And not only is it addictive like that, but you know, there's another factor, and that is that it's contagious. And so people around me see it, and they want to do it too. So I know I'm out of time, so I'm just going to throw it up there and say that my LSD is lift someone daily. Find a way to find somebody, just like the example I just give of what I would say to Larry. Those are the kind of things, just little things. Experiment with this one. It's crazy what this does, but only smiling at somebody, walking, the next time you're in the corridor of an airport, you're walking down the hall in an airport, look up. Don't look down at the ground and the tiles and the carpet, but look up and catch someone's eye and then smile and watch what it does to them. It's amazing what just that little tiny act will do, and that's what I got. So I'll open that up to questions. What questions might there be out there?
All right. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Richard, I was intrigued by your topic about leading from the middle that you mentioned before. Can you give us just a brief synopsis of kind of what you meant by that and some keys to that, or is there not time to do that?
I don't know. I don't even know where we are in time. Where are we in time?
We got about, we'll give you about 5 minutes to answer questions, so if you can do that.
Okay. So Leading from the Middle is a book that I have written that is yet to be published, really. I made a feeble attempt at publishing, but I didn't like the result, and so I put the brakes on it. But Leading from the Middle, what it really comes down to is multiple meanings. It's why I selected what it is. Leading from the middle for me, the number one thing is most books written to leadership, okay, are written to the CEO. It's to the person that says, all right, this is what you're going to do when you reach that level and you're the CEO or the owner of your company. However, in an organization of 105,000 people like the FAA, one person becomes the CEO, and then there's about 25,000 managers that will never become the CEO. And so they sit and they read those books and then they wait. Okay, I'm going to work really hard and one day I'm going to be the CEO, but when they never get there, they never actually start leading. And so leading from the middle, my first definition is about being a leader at every level of the organization. Leadership is not a title, it's not an authority, it's not some command and control, it's nothing like that. It is about just strictly influencing. John Quincy Adams said, if you inspire someone to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. So that dreaming more is what I did with Larry there, just giving him that little bit. The second piece is I think that we should learn to work more with our gut and our heart, so leading from the middle instead of leading with our brain. Using what we feel like is the right thing to say, helping people. Maya Angelou said it's not what we do and say, it's how we make people feel that stick with them. That's how they know that we like them, we appreciate them. So there's two of them. There's about 5 meanings of what leading from the middle is all about. But the book itself actually starts, chapter 1 is the story of the Coca-Cola crash that we already did. And then from there, I try to methodically go through some steps of things that you can do, mistakes that I made along the way. I try to do it methodically, but the whole point is I'm trying to inspire people to be leaders at all levels. Even if you're don't have manager in your title, it doesn't really matter. Be a leader.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Any time for one more question? All right. Richard, the one question I might have is, having the experience you've had with the FAA, how does it affect your air travel at this point?
I am extremely cavalier about flying. I love the whole thing. I love the airline industry. I love private aviation, the smaller aircraft, and I have never, there was one flight that I got scared on, and that was in about 1983. So locally, those that are old enough will remember the Thistle Dam collapsed, and there were floating cows and floating buildings and all that stuff up Spanish Fork Canyon. My brother and I rented an airplane, and we flew over that in 1983. And when we were flying up in Spanish Fork Canyon, the turbulence was so bad that it was throwing us against the ceiling and the walls and all over the airplane. And I got a little scared in that flight. But I haven't been scared in an airplane since then.
Well, appreciate that. Well, thank you, Richard.
It is an extremely safe system, Larry.
Awesome.
If you've ever traveled internationally, you realize, wow, we have a pretty safe system.
Yep. Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for your time and sharing your insights with us, Richard. And as we all try and lead from where we're at, we'll put those into practice. So in wrapping up, I'd like to share the four-way test. And for Richard's benefit, I don't know how much you know about Rotary. We're the largest service organization in the world. And the four-way test is kind of the beacon that we go by as you think about Beacon Leadership Group. And this is what guides us in our thoughts and service. So the four-way test says, of the things we think, say, and do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? So with that, I'd like to wrap up the meeting. Again, thanking Richard for his time tonight, spending time with us and sharing his message. And wish everybody a great week. And if you have anything specific, reach out and we'll have another great meeting next Wednesday night.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you, everyone.